Hey guys, Dwayne here. I thought I'd try something different and do a kind of video associated thing with this post, see how that works out. Kind of wanted to put a more, like human face to my ideas, because sometimes I think, some of the nuance gets lost in just writing. And for this post especially, because of the many multi-layers to it, I'm touching upon, theropods, but making that a touchstone to talk about, human emotions and gender roles, and where I think, I get into, you could call it political stuff, or the more of the softer social sciences, and that's something that might not sit well with a lot of my audience that just wants the, presumably a blog about science, paleontology, but I never claimed or wanted that rigorous approach. I wanted more of a documentation of my own life and ideas, and putting down things like synchronicities and my own growth as a person. I wanted this to be, my blog entity to necessarily be a document of that. So, again, some people might like that approach. I know that discussions of spirituality and these things might go under the banner of pseudoscience or New Age karmic experiences, or whatever you want to call them. It would be kind of shunned by the rational kind of hard science line. But I see in my own kind of journey, a synthesis of the rational brain logic and more of an intuitive kind of inward-looking path. And I've talked about intuition a lot on my blog, and I'm sure even if other scientists or people that create stuff don't talk specifically about it, I'm sure I'm not the only person to have these experiences, which is why this post about sensitivity in the muzzle of theropods, I think there's a very strong argument to be made. It's going to beget pro-social behavior bonding, and that has to be seen in conjunction with the emerging data on very long incubation times for these animals, where you might see a male and a female come together. It could be a group of females that were maybe sisters, clutchmates, if you will, or even males that were clutchmates, kind of like more of a pride scenario. And you could have even between the generations, some kind of bonding and familial relationships could happen with this sensitivity that is, we always knew there was something there with those foramina, and it was always recognized in spinosaurids. Then when we start seeing in these animals that are obviously not aquatic, the thing with spinosaurids, they're in water, so it's a medium to conduct movement and whatnot. We really can't make that same argument in mainly terrestrial allosaurids and tyrannosaurids and whatnot. So when we're seeing this sensitivity that's probably on par with our own fingertips for amount of nerve endings and tactile ability, it really begs the question: was facial nuzzling and these other kind of bonding behaviors very emblematic of many, probably most large or even smaller carnivorous theropods? And and I went through that, and in thinking through that, you have to imagine that there's what can only be described as an emotional sensitivity inherent in that, because before the facial muzzling occurs, these animals have to read and react to each other's intentions, which can only be described as kind of an intuitive reading of the other's body language or signals they're sending. And that can be done through posturing, the famous dinosaur dance floor or whatnot, and also inflatable gular pouches, or the flesh antlers I speculate on. And so I really took that argument to a logical conclusion, and again tied it with the long incubation spans, where these animals couldn't or would have much more problems than like a crocodile that has a low metabolism and could just hunker down at its nest by the water and go for a couple months with minimal feeding. If these animals had incubation periods of a month to 2 months or whatnot, it's really going to set us some problems because they can't form the huge colonies that hadrosaurids, sauropods we know did, where it's more of a safety numbers issue, and they'd have to depart and leave the nest for extended amounts of time to forage because they can't just walk a couple meters over and browse on some foliage. They got to go to where the feeding's good, which might be a day or 2 days. So that really, I think, begets the notion of some pretty intricate nest behavior and not necessarily a highly cooperative, but just a very, they could diminish their aggressive capabilities when need be. And this also really begs the question on how widespread and how much of a daily occurrence was this face-biting behavior, which we know occurs, but I suspect it's more of a documentation of the more rarer violent encounters, and that most of this most of the times the highly violent territorial battles would be avoided. So that's where I'm going with the theropod thing. On the social kind of more